Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfoud, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Dear listeners, welcome to this episode number 16 of our radio program, Discovering Sacred Christian Art. Today is the Holy Thursday, the 18th of April, and thank you to all of you who are listening from the United States of America. Some of you are listening from Italy, but I feel myself to say thank you to all of you, and also to all the Holy Apostles College and Seminary community for having been, even if virtually of course, close to me here in Europe, in France especially, with your prayers starting from our evening of Monday, the 15th of April. And the Holy Week began with this terrible event that touched the heart of our history, the heart of the history of Christianity, the fire that broke out at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, destroying the roof and causing the spire to collapse in front of horrified onlookers and in front of our eyes, in front of televisions. This is the lead story on front of pages in newspapers in these days, but an important point of our story too. This radio program is entirely devoted to the history of the sacred Christian art. So I decided yesterday that I will dedicate the next episode, the episode number 17, entirely to discover the beautiful Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. This cathedral is one of the most ancient symbols in art and architecture of our Christian culture and religion. Today, for this episode number 16, for this Holy Triduum, for these so intense days for us, I will focus on the cross, on the symbol of our Christian life. And I will explain the reason of the crucifixion in art. So this episode number 16 is entitled The Crucifixion in Art, Iconography of the Crucifixion. Well, I can say that you can look at the images that our Dr. Sebastian Mahfoud uploaded on the website of Discovering Sacred Christian Art, but if you are in front of a computer, or if you have a smartphone, a tablet with you, if you have a connection in internet, you can search for the images I will speak about in this short account about crucifixion in art. We can say that the history of the crucifixion in art began again, as we explained, starting from the episode number 1 in the late antiquity. But I want to point out that the earliest known artistic representations of the crucifixion predate the Christian era, because they included the Greek representations of mythical crucifixions, so not Christian at all, inspired by the use of punishment by the Persians. In the first 3 centuries of the early Christian art, the crucifixion was rarely depicted, as I explained you. Some engraved gems thought to be 2nd or maybe 3rd century have survived, but the subject does not appear in the art of the catacombs of Rome. And it is thought that at this period the image was restricted to heretical groups of Christians. The earliest Western images clearly originating the mainstream of the church are 5th century, including the scene on the doors of that church about I spoke in my previous episodes, the Church of Santa Sabina in Rome. The great emperor Constantine I forbade crucifixion as a method of execution, and early church leaders regarded crucifixion with horror and thus as an unfit subject for an altruistic portrayal, even if for symbolic services. The discovery of the true cross by the Emperor Constantine's mother, the Empress Helena, and the development of the Golgotha as a site for pilgrimage, together with the dispersal of fragments of the relic of the cross across the Christian world that began in that historical moment, led to a change of attitude. It was probably in Palestine that the image of the crucifixion of the cross developed, and many of the earliest depictions are in the so-called Monza Ampulle. Why Monza? Because Monza is the name of the city we have here in North Italy, close to Milan. The Monza Ampulle is the Latin name to indicate the object. It is small metal flasks for holy oil that were pilgrims' souvenirs from the Holy Land, as well as 5th century ivory reliefs, again from Italy. Prior to the Middle Ages, early Christians preferred to focus on the triumphant Christ rather than a dying one. This is one of the reasons we don't have a specific iconography for the crucifixion, and most important, we don't have a crucifixion at all in representations, because the concept of the risen Christ was so central to their faith, and the importance of the resurrection of the Easter was so central that the crucifixion was abandoned as a representation. The plain cross became depicted often as a glorified symbol as the crux gemmata. The crux gemmata is a way to represent a cross that is typical of the early Christian and early medieval art, and that I recall speaking about the mosaics, where the cross, or at least its front side, is principally decorated with jewels. Covered with jewels is the crux gemmata, of course, and as many real early medieval processional crosses in a goldsmith work were. For what concerns the history of the Eastern Church, it's complicated, but let me try to explain, because the early depictions showed a living Christ and tending to minimize the appearance of suffering, so as to draw attention to the positive, again, message of resurrection and faith, rather than to the physical realities of execution. In the early history of the Church in Ireland, for example, important events were often commemorated by erecting pillars with elaborate crucifixes carved into them. So we have the famous Irish crosses, such as where St. Patrick, patron of Ireland, returning as a missionary bishop, saw the place he was held captive in his youth. And changing geographical area in the early Byzantine depictions, such as in the famous Rabula Gospel. The Rabula Gospels, is a 6th century illuminated Syriac Gospel book often show Christ flanked by Longinus and Stephaton with their spear and pole with vinegar. So according to the Gospels, the vinegar was offered just before Christ died, and the lance was used just after, so the presence of the two flanking figures symbolizes the double reality of God and man in Christ. In images from after the end of the Byzantine iconoclasm, Christ is shown as dead, but his body is undamaged and there is no expression of pain. The Eastern Church held that Christ's body was invulnerable. The S-shaped slumped body type, that is one of the most important representations, was developed only in the 11th century. These images were one of the complaints against Constantinople given by Rome in that famous great point that was the Great Schism of the year 1054. Although the so-called Giro Crucifix or Giro Cross in Cologne that was built in the 10th century, and it is the oldest large sculpture of the crucified Christ north of the Alps, and has always been displayed in Cologne Cathedral in Germany, commissioned by Giro, that was the Archbishop of Cologne, is probably nearly a century older. It is, in fact, the 10th century work of art. But for what concerns all what we can admire in our Western art, Western Christian art, we can say that as a broad generalization, the earliest depictions before about the 9th century tended to show all the three crosses, those of Jesus, the good thief, and the bad thief. But later medieval depictions mostly showed with just Jesus alone and his cross. We are arriving to our modern representation, because from the Renaissance either type might be shown. The number of other figures shown depended on the size and medium of the work, but there was a similar trend for early depictions to show a number of figures, giving way in the Middle Ages to just the Virgin Mary and St. John the Evangelist, shown standing on either side of the cross, as in the Stabat Mater depictions, or sculptured or painted on panels, and at the end of each arm of a row the cross. A bracket about the Stabat Mater depiction is a feature in the Crucifixion of Jesus in art, in which the Virgin Mary is depicted under the cross during the crucifixion of Christ. In these depictions, the Virgin Mary is almost always standing to the right-hand side of the body of her Son, Jesus, on a cross, with St. John the Apostle. Well, going on, we can say that, for example, although according to the Gospel accounts, the clothing of Jesus was removed from him before his crucifixion, the artists, starting from the high Middle Age, have thought it proper to represent his lower body as draped in some way, of course, for ethical reasons. In one type of sculpted crucifixion, of which we can mention the so-called Volto Santo in Lucca. Lucca is a city in Tuscany in central Italy, and the Volto Santo is the Holy Face, is a venerated wooden corpus, body of a crucifix in Lucca, Italy. And say just what is medieval legends stated that it had been established by that Nicodemus, who assisted Joseph of Arimathea in depositing Christ in the tomb, and specifically dated its arrival in Lucca, in Tuscany, central Italy, in the 8th century. So, taking this holy face in Lucca, and taking it as the classical example, Christ continued to wear the long collobium, that is a drape of the Rabula Gospels. In the Gothic period, so we are going on, more elaborated narrative depictions developed, including many extra figures of Mary Magdalene, the supposed, especially the three Marys behind the Virgin Mary, soldiers, often including an officer on a horse, angels in the sky. The moment when Longinus the centurion pierces Christ with his spear, the so-called holy lance, is often shown, and the blood and water spurting from Christ's side is often caught in a chalice held by an angel. In larger images, the other two crosses might return, but most often not. In some works, donor portraits were included in the scene. But this is a tradition, especially for what concerns the Italian art. Such depictions of the crucifixion begin in the later 12th century and become common where space allows in the 13th century. I have in front of me the images of the crucifix of the Holy Cross by Cimabue and by Giotto, and also by Albrecht Artdorfer later in Germany. Related scenes to the crucifixion, such as the deposition of Christ, the entombment of Christ, and the nailing of Christ to the cross developed. In the late Middle Ages, increasingly intense and realistic representations of suffering were shown, reflecting the development of highly emotional, we can say, subjects related to the prayer of the contemplation of the cross, and devotional trends such as German mysticism. Some, like the Throne of Mercy, the Man of Sorrows, or the Pietà, related to the crucifixion, to the episodes related to the crucifixion. And we can say that the same trend affected the depiction of other figures, notably in the Swoon of the Virgin, who is very commonly shown paintings of between the 14th and the 16th century. So this depiction was attached by theologians in the 16th century and became unusual. After typically more tranquil depictions during the Italian Renaissance, so not its northern equivalent, which produced works such as the Isenheim altarpiece, very important, with the Crucifixion by Matthias Grünewald. There was a return to intense emotionalism in the Baroque in works such as Rubens' famous Elevation of the Cross. And if you give a glance to modern art, well, we have, before what concerns the term modern, the Cristo Crucificado by Velázquez in 17th century, but we have also a crucified of the 18th century in Canary Island Cathedral, and we have contemporary crucifixions that are inspired by medieval and modern models. For example, I'm quite sure that you heard about the Crucifixion painted by the surrealist Salvador Dali. Crucifixion that is also called the Corpus Hypercubus, representing the cross as a hypercube. I am quite sure that you also had the occasion to see many other contemporary crucifixions. Well, we can say that the crucifixion, as we see, as we know, is the result of a history of Christian iconography, of a history of the iconography of the cross, starting from the first representation in Santa Sabina in Rome and arriving today with a modern representation as the representation we have in the church of Bergamo in North Italy, the church that appears on the front cover of my book, Discovering Sacred Christian Art, that soon will be published in English. We have contemporary representations of the cross that are inspired by ancient models. And I invite you, my dear listeners, to see the images that Dr. Sebastian Mahfoud uploaded on our website, in the section dedicated to the images of Discovering Sacred Christian Art. And I hope that your interest in front of the iconography of crucifixion will be satisfied, but don't worry, I will continue also in the next episodes to speak about the symbol of the cross, the symbol of the crucifixion in the history of art. I wish you, my dear listeners, to you and your loved ones, a truly blessed Easter Triduum and a blessed Easter, and I'm looking forward to speaking for you and to creating for you the next episode of our radio program, the episode number 17. Thank you, and have a blessed Easter Triduum and a blessed Easter. Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfoud. Good day.